The surgeon pulls off her cap. There was a complication. At that same moment, a board email pings. End it with the architect, or Harbour North dies. PICU alarms shriek. Valerie reaches for Miles, and the screen cuts to black. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video. The more voices we reach, the louder these stories become. And drop your city in the comments. Let's see where love finds us. SeaTac had that storm day hum. Glossy floors reflecting a ceiling the colour of tin. Departure boards flipping from yellow to red like a heartbeat losing rhythm. Miles Carter stood at gate B12 with his backpack on one shoulder and a rolled transit map under his arm, the afterglow of a good presentation still warm in his chest. He'd pitched his pilot on equitable bus corridors to a room full of planners, and not a single one had checked their phone while he spoke. For once, the numbers and the hope had landed in the same place. Then he heard it. Quiet, stubborn crying, the kind that tries to hide behind a polite smile and fails. A woman stood at the podium, a sleeping toddler draped over her like trust. Her carry-on lay unzipped, its belly spilled, crayons, a plush rabbit, a folder of papers stamped with colour tabs. The gate agent's voice was professional and soft. "I'm truly sorry, ma'am. Flight 233 is oversold. The next confirmed seat to Los Angeles is Wednesday morning." "Wednesday?" the woman repeated, and the single word caught on something fragile. "My daughter's pre-op is tomorrow at 8. It took 5 months to get. Please, I'll pay for any seat. I'll buy the plane." The line behind Miles shuffled, some people averting their eyes, others staring the way you look at a small fire you hope won't spread. The woman had a boardroom sort of poise, even exhausted, thick and curvy in a fitted pencil dress, the kind of beauty that refused to apologize for taking up space. Rain had teased flyaways out of her blonde twist. Her mouth trembled. Her spine didn't. The agent glanced down the tablet, grim. "I've checked every connection. Weather's locking us down." Miles felt his grandmother's voice step out of memory. "If a need walks up and you can help, baby, that's not coincidence. That's assignment." His feet moved before the doubt could talk him out of it. He stepped to the counter, gentle but steady. "I'm on 233. Transfer my seat to her." The woman blinked, blue eyes suddenly bright with disbelief. "You don't even know me." "That's true," he said, "but I can read a departure board and a mother's face." He offered a small, real smile. "I'm Miles." She adjusted the sleeping child with tender expertise. "I'm Valerie." Her voice softened around the name she loved. "And this is Maya. I can't take your seat." "You can," he said, and because something in him trusted the moment, he let warmth into his tone. "Please." The agent looked up. "Sir, once we process, we cannot undo, and you'll be grounded at least 2 days." "Seattle's lovely in the rain," Miles said. "I'll survive." Printer chatter, the thunk of a reissued boarding pass, a flicker of gratitude passing over the agent's features like light over water. Valerie fumbled for her wallet. "Please, let me." "Don't ruin my good deed with money," he teased, then softened. "Get her to that appointment." She nodded hard, as if the motion itself held her together. The speakers chimed. Final call for Flight 233 to Los Angeles. Panic flashed across her face, and Miles moved without thinking, kneeling to zip her bag, tucking the rabbit into a side pocket where small hands could find it later. He stood and held out the printed pass. Her fingers brushed his. He felt the slightest tremor. "I don't know how to thank you." "You just did," he said. "Go." She turned for the jet bridge, then pivoted back, tears and determination at war in her eyes. Up close, he noticed the details, the fine watch too tastefully expensive to brag, the red lacquer nail chipped at the corner, the faint perfume like citrus and salt. "You're sure?" "Absolutely." "Okay." Her mouth found a shape that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite surrender. "Miles, I won't forget you." He watched the door close behind her and felt it. How a choice can reverberate through a day like a bell. Through the rain-streaked window, he tracked the plane's slow ballet away from the gate, the wing lights blinking as if the aircraft were thinking. He'd given away a seat and somehow gained a strange, steady peace, as if he'd slipped into the lane he was made to be in. The city made a soft companion for a stranded man. He walked Pike Place under awnings, drank black coffee in a cafe that felt like a secret, let the market's damp noise fill his ears. He sketched on napkins. A bus stop canopy he'd been wrestling with finally solved itself in the way of problems that give up once you stop staring. On the second night, he stood on the pier while rain stitched the dark and thought of a mother's spine refusing to bend and the child asleep there, trusting. He didn't know their story beyond the edges of a gate. He hoped his tiny stitch of kindness had held. By Monday, Los Angeles air felt like a warm hand on the back, urging him forward. The office was half models and half hustle, cutting mats scarred by 100 projects, a ficus that refused to die. Tia, his partner, looked up from 2 monitors and a lemon-yellow highlighter. He lives. The client from West Adams called twice and a non-profit emailed a question with 17 question marks. 17 means they're excited, Miles said, dropping his backpack, or panicking. Same thing, Tia said, then studied his face. You look lighter. I did a thing, he admitted. Gave my seat to a mom who needed it more. Of course you did. Before he could add the joke about hero complexes, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost let it ring out. Curiosity elbowed caution aside. Miles Carter, Mr. Carter, a woman said, and his body recognized the voice a half-second before his brain did. This is Valerie Quinn. He sat all the way down. Valerie, from the airport. From the airport, she echoed, and he could hear a smile threading the words together. Maya met her team. We start the final tests Friday. I've been busy and grateful. I'm glad, he said, and realized he meant it with a depth that surprised him. How can I? Repay you? Her tone warmed, then tilted. A key turned in a lock. I've been reading. Your public pilot. Your buried metrics. You design like you believe cities should be kind. He choked on a laugh. I bury things because procurement committees get spooked by ambition. I don't, she said, and the 2 words rearranged the air. I'm CEO at Quinn Harbor Group. Community redevelopment and social equity, despite how buzzwordy that sounds. I want to meet. Tonight. 7 o'clock. Bar Verve downtown. Tea tonight? I wear red when I'm on a mission, she said lightly. Consider yourself warned. The line clicked. Tia stared at him, eyes wide. Who was that? You look like you were just invited to prom by a hurricane. Valerie Quinn, he said, tasting the name. Somewhere in his head a headline unfurled. He'd seen it. Quinn Harbor Group wins Westlake bid. Quinn Harbor CEO outmaneuvers hedge fund and builds a library. She's a person who wears red when she's on a mission. By 6:59, he'd convinced himself 3 times not to be nervous and failed all 3. Bar Verve was the kind of place where the lighting suggested confidence and the glassware whispered about restraint. He pulled open the brass-framed door and the room took him in. The splay of shadows, low table lamps, a bartender with sleeves rolled to perfect geometry. He saw her instantly. The red dress was not an apology. It was a declaration that curves were a privilege to be witnessed. Blonde hair in a precise twist. A bodyguard nowhere, but the way people arranged themselves around her told a different story about power. She stood as he approached, and the noise of the room softened, as if the storm had walked inside and learned to smile. Miles, she said, his name landing in the space between them like a promise not to waste time. Up close, the word tired had abandoned her. She looked like morning after rain, fresh, decisive, a touch of wild held in check by will. Thank you for coming. He found his voice. Thank you for existing in red. A laugh, surprised and real, touched the corner of her mouth. She gestured to the banquette. I'm not here to say thank you, she said, settling in and levelling those blue eyes on him, the world narrowing to the table's dark wood and a single candle flame. I'm here to see if you're exactly who I think you are, and if you're willing to build something that will make this city remember our names. The candle between them was hardly a candle at all, just a bead of light floating in a shallow dish, but it put a soft glow on Valerie's cheekbones and lit her eyes with a kind of disciplined warmth. I don't believe in coincidence, she said, folding her hands on the table, red dress cutting a clean diagonal across her curves. I believe in alignment. You gave away your seat. I build neighborhoods for people who are always asked to give away theirs. I read Appendix C, Miles. You hid the radical thing. That transit isn't just movement, it's care. He felt exposed and strangely relieved. Committees get skittish when you say the word care about budgets. Then let's not ask a committee. She slid a slim leather folio across to him. Inside, a satellite map of a derelict rail spur east of the river, a scatter of handwritten notations, a headline clipped from a paper about skyrocketing evictions. Harbour North Yard, 40 acres of rust and weeds. I bought a controlling stake last month. The plan on paper is a boilerplate mixed use. I don't want boilerplate. I want a proof of concept that a working-class kid can grow up in beauty, that a night shift nurse can sleep in quiet, that a mother who gets terrible news can find help within 3 blocks. Clinic, childcare, a plaza that belongs to people at all hours, a food hall that incubates local vendors instead of importing brands, and a bus corridor that works like a promise. He traced the lines with his eyes. The parcel was awkward, pinched by industrial remnants and a sluggish canal, but the awkward ones sometimes sang once you learned the tune. You're asking for a city disguised as a project. I'm asking for dignity in concrete and shade trees. Her voice thinned, then steadied. My daughter's cardiology unit is across town from where most mothers like me can actually afford to live. My driver, yes, I have a driver, wealth is an amplifier for convenience, can get us there in 40 minutes. I have stood in elevators with women whose faces hold together for their children with will alone. And then they take the bus home for 2 hours, carrying fear like luggage. A beat. I can't fix the whole system. I can build a place where it's a little less cruel. The room's low music felt suddenly irrelevant, a pretty wreath around something real. Why me? He asked, not falsely modest, but genuinely curious. You could call any legacy firm and have a parade of portfolios by breakfast. Her mouth did a small, knowing tilt. Legacy firms colour inside the line and then invoice in serif font. Appendix C told me you think in lived minutes, not square feet. And, she exhaled. At the gate, you didn't make me small. You didn't make me feel like a charity story. You looked at me like I was a person carrying a person. He swallowed. He hadn't realised until she said it how many rooms had trained him to be grateful for being seen at all. What's the timeline? Fast, she said, unapologetic. City hearings in 4 months, groundbreak next summer if we thread the needles. You'd be lead design, full creative control inside the bounds of budget, safety, and a thing I care about more than either, belonging. Their drinks arrived and neither of them reached for them. The map was their meal. He started sketching in the margins. An L-shaped plaza that caught morning sun, a clinic facing the park so patients saw trees, not traffic, a busway braided through like a bright ribbon. She watched without interrupting, a palm under her chin, phone face down on the table like an oath. Run the stormwater into a visible rill, she said at one point, surprising him. Teach the kids what the sky's been doing above their heads all along. You read my piece on water commons. I read everything. She paused. It's not just for kids. Her eyes flickered, a flare of something vulnerable and quickly folded. Maya loves the sound of water. It calms her. In the hospital, we play her recordings of rain. She made her knuckles relax on the folio. Her surgery window is close. How close? Soon, she said, the word too small and too large. Final test this week. I won't drag you into my private life on chapter 1, as my PR coach would say, but I'm not compartmentalizing this conversation either. I want to build Harbour North because the world taught me how few places are built for crises that happen on Tuesdays. He surprised himself by reaching across the map and tapping the edge of her hand with his fingertip, brief, respectful. Thank you for telling me. Red lacquer flashed on a breath of a laugh that was not quite a laugh. She turned her hand palm up, a question he decided not to answer yet. They went back to the plan. Time played its trick of speeding when it matters. When they finally did lift their glasses, the ice had melted into a softer version of what it had been, and the candle had learned how to be steady. Tomorrow morning, she said as they stood, come see the site with me. Boots, not dress shoes. The ground likes to test us. Outside, the city was a sheet of night perforated by windows. A light wind tugged at the hem of her red. A car idled at the curb, quiet, anonymous. Between the glass doors and the slice of street, they lingered in a pocket of air that felt private. Miles, she said, and the way she said his name told him she knew how easily people could fall in love with an idea of a person, not the person. If you take this on, I will push you. I will fight you where it matters and shield you where it doesn't. I won't flirt with the line between us while the stakes are high. I am. Candid, he supplied. Dangerously. She agreed. 7:30. Gate on the south fence. Text me your size if you need hard hats. He wanted to joke that his head was medium and his hope was large, but the night asked for a different register. "I'll be there." She stepped into the car and the door shut with that soft, wealthy hush. He stood on the sidewalk longer than made sense, watching his reflection in the polished brass handle, man at the edge of something. Dawn at Harbour North Yard tasted like iron. The site was a geometry of neglect, rail spurs like veins under scabbed weeds, a battered warehouse with its windows punched out, a wavering chain-link fence that had lost arguments with time. Crows made a parliament on a light pole and held whatever counsel crows hold about human folly. Valerie was already there, in dark denim and a white hard hat, curves translated from couture to utility without losing their argument for presence. Steel-toed boots. Safety vest that did nothing to hide that her body had learned the language of both grace and gravity. A field team waited, planner, site superintendent, a hydrologist with maps of a creek you could no longer see. "You clean up well," he said, and when she arched a brow he added, "into a person who looks like she intends to win arguments with geology." That coaxed a quick smile. "Geology always wins. We negotiate favourable terms." They walked the perimeter. He crouched to sift the crushed granite, stood to align sightlines with downtown's distant spine. He pictured where morning gathered and where exhaust lingered, where kids would run and where men in tired bodies would find a bench that didn't punish them for sitting. She didn't slow him with small talk. She asked questions that untangled his ideas. When he talked about a bus plaza rimmed by shade trees that wouldn't die in the first heat wave, she nodded and said, "And find species the city arborist will approve of without a war." At the southeast corner, they stopped at a breach in the fence where someone had made a shortcut from the adjacent neighbourhood, a desire path kicked through chain link. On the other side stood a narrow street, a bodega with sun-faded produce posters, an older woman with a broom. Valerie lifted a hand. "Morning, Miss Ortiz." "Morning, Mia," the woman called back, the endearment old and easy. Her gaze slid to Miles, measuring. "This him?" "This him," Valerie said, and in 2 words made him feel both chosen and accountable. Miss Ortiz leaned on her broom. "They've come before with sketches and smiles. Then the rent went up and my nephew left for Barstow. You going to build me a place to sit that doesn't burn my thighs in August?" Miles didn't reach for a promise. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We'll test the bench with our bare legs at noon." Miss Ortiz laughed, a bright bark that made the crows pause. On the walk back, something unclenched in Valerie's shoulders. "You didn't sell her poetry." "Poetry's not a seat," he said. "It's the shade you remember while you sit." Her phone buzzed. She glanced, and because lies waste time, she said, "Hospital, confirming Friday at 9. She locked the screen, jaw working. "I don't expect you there. I don't expect anyone." He thought of the way she had put her phone face down last night, making a small sanctuary for their work. "I'll be there," he said, not as a gallant gesture, but as a fact whose shape he recognized. When she opened her mouth, protest, decorum, the script a powerful woman learns so no one uses her needs against her, he added, "I read to kids better than most interns. I can run for coffee, argue with vending machines, and make up stories about clouds until she smiles." The corner of her mouth lifted, then steadied. "Maya likes the cloud that looks like a dragon who lost his way home." "Then Friday," he said, "we'll give the dragon directions." Back at his studio that afternoon, he spread the folio on the big table and drew until the light went honey gold. The first plan arrived like weather, inevitable once it formed. A clinic with a porch like a neighbour's stoop, a daycare with windows at kid height, a plaza that invited lingering without requiring purchase, a water rill a child could follow with a finger and learn patience. He labelled a corner, "Miss Ortiz's bench, test at noon." At midnight he took a photo of the messy draft and sent it with no subject line. 2 minutes later, 3 dots pulsed, then her reply landed like rain on a roof you trust. Belonging, in pencil. "See you Friday, Miles." Children's hospitals wake before the city does. The corridors smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and brave cartoons. By the time the sun found the parking structure, Miles was already in room 4B with a canvas tote full of picture books, a phone loaded with rain sounds, and a small stuffed dragon he'd bought from a gift shop that was too cheerful for its own good. Valerie turned at the rustle of the tote. She wasn't the red dress hurricane from the bar. She wore a soft grey sweater and jeans, hair in a loose bun like a truce with sleep. The sweater did nothing to hide the generous lines of her body. The exhaustion did nothing to dim the alert blue of her eyes. "You're early," she said, trying to make it a tease and missing by a heartbeat. "You said 9, he said. "Dragons lose their way unless someone shows up at 8. Maya peeked over the blanket, hospital bracelet too big for her wrist. "Is that for me?" "It depends." Miles said seriously, "Do you promise to help me tell the Cloud Dragon how to find the freeway back to his cave?" She nodded, solemn, then smiled around the edges. The nurse, all competence and calm, tucked a pulse ox on a tiny finger. "Pre-op echo, then contrast MRI. No food until after," she told Valerie and gentled her tone. "Mom, you doing okay?" Valerie's chin worked once, twice. "I am now." They wheeled Maya to Echo, Miles walking alongside, hand on the rail, narrating each doorway like it was a storybook spread. "This hallway is where the linoleum rivers meet," he intoned. "This corner is guarded by the snack machine who can be bribed." "Does the dragon like snacks?" Maya whispered. "Only the kind that beep," he whispered back, and the nurse winked. In the dim Echo room, as gel went cool on a small chest and blue-white images bloomed on a monitor, Valerie's hand found the rail. Miles stood close enough to be a wall she could lean against without falling into him. He didn't talk while the sonographer measured and measured. He was a stillness she could borrow. The doctor came in, introduced herself, Quan, steady, exact, and spoke in phrases that were a ladder. Numbers within expected range, no new anomalies, the window for surgery still open. "We'll confirm the schedule this afternoon," she said, eyes kind. "You're doing beautifully, Maya." "Mommy is," Maya said, and Valerie pressed her mouth to her daughter's hair, not trusting her voice. Between tests, there is always waiting. Miles made his canvas tote work like magic. He set the phone to a loop of rain on leaves, then traced a water path on the blanket with his finger that matched the sound, slow and patient, like he had all the time in the world. "The dragon says he can't see the signs," he murmured, and drew a curve. "He says everything is too loud." "We can make it quiet," Maya murmured back, eyelids heavy. "Shh, for the dragon." Valerie watched them and lost track of the minutes. She wasn't used to needing anyone she hadn't vetted and hired. But when Maya drifted into a medicated sleep before the MRI, she realized the tightest coil in her chest wasn't the fear of surgery. It was the dread of facing fear alone. Her phone buzzed. Board chair Caldwell, of course. She stepped into the hallway and answered. "It's a hospital morning," she said without preface. "Make it quick." "It will be," Caldwell said, voice smooth as polished walnut. "We saw the preliminary deck on Harbour North. Impressive ambition. We also saw you've engaged a very small firm without an RFP. Lead design," she corrected. "We'll bid out packages as required." "And the gentleman in question," Caldwell went on, "was photographed leaving Bar Verve with you Wednesday evening. A gossip site framed it as a date. Optics matter, Valerie." "You called me while my daughter is being prepped to say the word optics," she said, and felt the temperature in her voice drop. Miles was there to discuss stormwater and bus corridors. "Stormwater is not our shareholders," Caldwell said. "You'll receive a list of approved firms by noon. Pick from it, or at least run an RFP and let your architect win in daylight. If he's so excellent, he'll rise." She looked through the window to 4B. Miles was kneeling at bedside, rearranging the dragon and the pulse ox cord so they didn't tangle, like he'd balanced surgical tubing 100 times. A different anger kindled, older, not at Caldwell, but at a world that assumes its own way is the only way. "I'll take it under advisement," she said, which was executive, for we'll see. When she re-entered, Miles stood, reading the room without a word. "I'll get coffee," he said softly, "and something like a muffin that thinks it's healthy." "Try to convince the snack machine to be kind," she said, and almost smiled. He returned with 2 coffees and 3 tiny apple juices, because the vending machine had a buy-2-get-1 glitch he'd learned to exploit. They sat side by side in the 2 awkward chairs that hospitals buy in bulk, ankles almost touching but not quite. She told him, because there was no point not telling him, about Caldwell and lists and the loudness of wealthy men when a woman uses her judgment. He listened, thumb circling the rim of the coffee lid, and when she finished he said, "Let me earn this. I don't need an inside lane. Put the RFP out. Make it hard and precise. We'll win or we won't, but the neighborhood will know we fought for it. You're not afraid you'll lose? I'm afraid of bad benches and dead trees. He met her eyes. I'm not afraid of proving it. Silence lived with them a while, not unkind. She studied him in the unflattering hospital light and saw things most rooms miss. A patience built from years of not being first pick. A steadiness that didn't need to be loud to be unbreakable. A face that softened around a sleeping child like it had been made for that exact act. She reached without thinking and touched his wrist where the pulse beat. "Thank you," she said, and wasn't sure whether she meant the coffee, the courage, or the refusal to be insulted on her behalf. "Always," he said, and didn't make the word bigger than it was. MRI took them to another level, past murals of whales and planets, past a boy in superhero pajamas conducting an IV poll like a parade float. Miles told a low, ridiculous story about a dragon who tried to ride the monorail and got his tail stuck in the doors. When the tech slid Maya into the machine, he leaned close to the opening and said through the plastic, "I'll be right here. If you hear thunder, it's the dragon sneezing." On the other side of the glass, Valerie watched the green lines climb and settle, as the machine hammered its terrible music. She folded her hands tight enough that her knuckles hurt. She felt Miles step beside her and didn't move away. Somewhere between the third and fourth sequence, she realized she was breathing in time with him. Results returned like weather, first a breeze under a door, then the room was a storm of numbers again, and Dr. Kwan's voice above it, firm. "No surprises. We have a surgical window. I'd like to schedule Tuesday." Tuesday had a shape. Tuesday had edges she could hold. Valerie swallowed. "Do it. Your team is one of the best," Miles said when the doctor left, meaning it like a pledge. "We'll bring the rain track." She nodded and then didn't trust the nod, so she said, "I thought it would be Monday." And the sentence broke on the last word, because fear is a graceless animal. He didn't tell her to be strong. He shifted 1 inch closer and let her lean, the way she'd used the rail during Echo. It was small and enormous at once. A woman whose life trained her to stand, permitting herself to rest against a man who did not demand even a thank you. She felt his shirt under her temple, cotton and warmth, and the faint scent of sawdust that clung to city designers like a superstition. For a long breath the world held. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. A text from Miss Ortiz sent to the site thread. A selfie on a metal bench outside the bodega, a comic grimace. "Tested at noon like you said, architect. Verdict, fire." Miles saw it and began to laugh, the kind of laugh that releases the room from its own grip. He typed back, noted. "Prototype coming. Shade tree on order." "Promise her you'll test it with bare legs," Valerie said, and tipped her head back to look at him. He was close enough she could see the tiny scar by his jaw, the one you only notice if you've been standing in hospital light with someone for hours. "That's in the spec now." They were still smiling when Maya came back, flushed but victorious, dragon tucked under her arm. "The dragon sneezed so loud," she told them gravely, "but we told him the way." They ate contraband crackers and juice like a feast. They watched a cartoon that forgot to be funny. Miles built a tiny rill with paper cups and a slow drip from a capped bottle, and Maya guided the water with her finger while Valerie tried not to cry at a plastic river on a hospital tray. By late afternoon, Tuesday was on the calendar in 4 places, printed in 4 different fonts. Dr. Kwan went over the plan again, each clause a raft. The nurse made the goodbyes gentle. In the elevator, a woman with a tired face and a fierce mouth caught Valerie's eye, Mother recognizing Mother, and gave the smallest nod. It felt like being knighted. Outside, the sky had finally remembered how to be blue. Miles walked them to the car. The driver took the tote and the dragon and left them a pocket of quiet air by the curb. Valerie turned to him, meaning to say something tidy about gratitude. What came out was not tidy. "I don't know where to put you in my life," she said. "I never say that. I always know where everything goes." He didn't flinch. "Put me in the part that shows up on Tuesdays," he said. "Everything else can figure itself out." Her mouth curved, not polished this time, just true. "You're dangerous." "I wear a hard hat," he said. She looked at his face like it might be a skyline she didn't know yet. Then, without rehearsal, she rose on her toes and set a quick kiss at the corner of his mouth. Nothing to scandalize a driver, everything to reorder a future. "For the Dragon," she said, cheeks flushed. "See you at the site tomorrow. We have a plaza to name." He touched the place where her mouth had been as the car pulled away, feeling foolish and 19, and exactly the right age for the moment. He stood under a sky that had the decency to shine and texted Tia, "Tuesday, hospital. Tomorrow? Harbour North. Also, we need to win an RFP." Tia replied with 3 fireworks and a knife. It felt like a plan. He started walking. The city was making a sound he loved, buses exhaling, feet talking to concrete, pigeons rearranging council. He thought of benches that don't burn, trees that don't die, and a plaza waiting for a name that belonged to the people who would claim it. He thought of a little girl with a dragon and a woman who had learned to lean for one breath and hadn't broken. He thought of Tuesday arriving like a tide and knew where he would be when it did. Tuesday began in the dark, the kind of black that asks you to remember what you believe. Valerie woke before her alarm and lay still, listening to Maya breathe. The house smelled faintly of machine coffee and ocean. On the kitchen island, her laptop glowed with a draft RFP, 37 pages of criteria and requirements, the kind of document that says we will earn this in daylight. She'd written it after midnight, revising the equity clauses until they sang, shade coefficients in the plaza, benches tested at noon, a bus corridor stitched to real people's hours. She added one last clause: community review sessions at the Bodega on 7th, no slick hotel ballrooms, and hit publish on Quinn Harbour's site. If the board wanted optics, they could have transparency. Maya stirred. Valerie crossed the room and kissed a warm forehead. "Today is the big day," she whispered. "The Dragon knows the way," Maya murmured, and settled. Miles texted at 6, "Leaving now. Tote loaded. See you at 7:30. I brought rain." She smiled despite the shaking place in her chest. By 7:30, the hospital was a soft engine, lights rising, carts whispering, a nurse humming something that might have been a lullaby or top 40 under her breath. Miles arrived with a canvas tote and a thermos that smelled like cinnamon. He wore a navy hoodie and that same steady, unshowy calm. He handed Valerie a paper crane he'd folded from a transit map. "For luck," he said. "Also, I put the RFP link on your site header for easy access. Don't fire me for meddling." "You meddled perfectly," she said, and let him see it, the gratitude that didn't fit in the usual scripts. "I published." He nodded like he'd expected her to be brave. "Good. Let the work stand in the sun." Pre-op had rules. A pediatric anesthesiologist with kind eyes explained masks and lines and flavoured gas. A nurse drew a smiley face on Maya's hand with a purple marker. Dr. Kwan appeared, crisp and honest, and went over the plan. Median sternotomy, cardiopulmonary bypass, patch placement. "We've done hundreds," she said, never once saying the lie that this one would be easy. "When do I sign the paper?" Valerie asked, and hated that her voice shook. "Now," Dr. Kwan said gently, and slid the clipboard across the table. Miles stood behind Valerie's chair, close enough that if she leaned, she would find him there. "We'll be here when you come back," he told Maya, and put the Dragon on her blanket like an appointment. They walked to the double doors together, the place where parents stop and teams go on. Maya's small hand fluttered a wave. "Don't forget the rain song," she said. "On loop," Miles promised. The doors sighed shut. Waiting is a discipline and a violence. The pediatric surgical waiting room tried to be kind. Murals of oceans, a coffee machine, chairs in forgiving colours. Somewhere a TV murmured about morning shows. Valerie and Miles took a corner by a window where the sky tried to be blue. "Tell me about the plaza," he said, in the tone of a man pulling a woman back from a cliff by reminding her that the ground exists. "Wayfinding Green," she said, and tried on the name. "We can't call it Maya's anything, not if we want to survive the donor calls. But the idea is hers, making a place that teaches you where to go when the signs are loud." "Wayfinding Green," he repeated. "Shade from live oaks with the right soil profile. A rill you can follow with a finger. Miss Ortiz's bench, cool at noon." "With a plaque that thanks her thighs," Valerie said, and laughed more than the joke deserved, because laughing took the shape of breathing. Her phone buzzed. Emergency board call at 10. Optics around your RFP, gossip sites circulating bar verve photos, questions about conflict of interest. "Joined from the hospital?" She closed her eyes. Of course a camera had found the night she'd worn red. "Bored?" Miles asked. Worried about the appearance of favoritism, she said, and watched something in his jaw tighten. Not injured ego, but a careful, principled stubbornness. Let them be worried, he said. We published an RFP with more rigor than they'd have demanded. Recuse yourself from the selection panel. Tell them transparency is the point. If a bigger firm wins, I'll build benches on someone else's budget and we'll still make wayfinding green true. She stared at him. You're infuriatingly reasonable. I'm terrified, he said, but not of merit. At 9:30, a nurse came with an update. Induction complete, bypass initiated, first stitch placed. Valerie exhaled a breath that had been sherbet hard in her chest. Miles set the rain track low and told a quieter story about a dragon who checks the signs twice and did not get his tail stuck this time. At 10, she took the board call in a side room full of pamphlets about resilience. Caldwell's square face filled the screen like an expensive frame. 3 other directors joined in, faces arranged into concern. Valerie didn't sit. I'm at the hospital, she said, so this will be brief. The RFP is live. I have recused myself from scoring and final selection. The panel will be our procurement lead, our equity officer, 2 outside architects, and a community representative selected by the Harbour North Neighbourhood Council. Miss Quinn, Caldwell began, the tone that explains the world to a woman who built a company. Transparency is not optional, she said. The gossip cycle will eat itself. The work will remain. If you want to debate my personal life, schedule it for a day when my child isn't in surgery. A director with gentler eyes cleared his throat. Valerie, no one doubts your love for your daughter. We're protecting the company. And the company is protecting its mission by doing this in daylight, she said. I expect your support. If not, put it in writing. Silence, then Caldwell clipped. We'll review the panel list. Keep us updated. She ended the call and stood very still until the world steadied. When she walked back into the waiting room, Miles didn't ask how it went. He handed her the thermos. Cinnamon, he said, because nothing evil can happen while something cinnamon exists. Is that science? She asked, taking a careful sip. Better, he said, grandmother. A volunteer brought a rolling cart with puzzles and stale cookies. A boy in a superhero cape offered her a sticker as if she needed promoting. She put the sticker on her phone case. It looked ridiculous and true. At 11, Miss Ortiz shuffled into the room like a small weather system that had chosen its effect. She wore her best church jacket and carried a plastic bag that smelled like oranges. Security tried to stop me, she said, but I told them I'm community review, and they didn't know what to do with that, so they let me through. She handed Valerie a peeled orange wrapped in paper towel. Vitamin C, for bravery. Valerie's throat closed around the kindest fruit in the world. Thank you. Miss Ortiz's eyes found Miles and did that measuring thing again. You holding up, architect? Holding, he said. They sat together like family who'd met 5 minutes ago and 60 years ago, which is how hospitals work. Miss Ortiz told a story about her nephew's terrible barbecue and made Valerie laugh. Miles built a small city out of cups and napkins and named the streets after virtues. Miss Ortiz asked if he planned to pave Decency Avenue with real money. Working on it, he said. Around noon, a man with a camera and a press badge hovered by the doorway. Miss Quinn, he called, oily polite. We're doing a piece on Harbour North and your relationship with the architect. Miles stood before Valerie could decide whether rage or exhaustion would speak first. Not today, he said quietly. Public figure, public hospital, the man said, as if rules were morality. Public decency, Miles said, and his voice was not loud, but it carried. You can ask your questions when a child isn't under anesthesia. If you have any human left in you, you'll go right about the nurses. The man hesitated, something almost like shame fighting habit, then retreated, muttering about deadlines. Miss Ortiz snorted. You told him. I bribed the snack machine once, Miles said. Press is the same. You find the button that makes it cough up a soul. At 1:30, Dr. Naquan's fellow came with careful sentences. Patch in place, bypass time within range, we're closing. Valerie nodded until the fellow left, then finally let herself fold, not into the chair but into Miles's side. He didn't make a sound. He just became a surface that could carry part of her for 5 minutes. You scare me, she said into his hoodie, surprising herself with the wrong pronoun and the right truth. You make me want to trust the part of me that isn't a plan. He smiled into her hair. Plans are great, but dragons still need directions. She pulled back enough to look him in the face. If she's okay, I'm going to kiss you without worrying about boards or headlines. If she's okay, he said, you can name a bench after your impulse. He reached for her hand and found it halfway. Their fingers fit like a promise they hadn't made yet. They sat like that while the rain track looped and the volunteer cart returned with worse cookies and better jokes. The world shrank to a door. At 2:15, the door opened. Dr. Kwan walked in, surgical cap still on, eyes clear. Valerie stood and the room dropped away. We had a complication, Dr. Kwan said, voice even, hands gentle. I need to talk to you about what happened in there. For one suspended heartbeat, she thought she'd misheard. The room sharpened. The coffee machine hissed. A child laughed at a cartoon. Ms. Ortiz's bag of oranges rustled. Dr. Kwan's eyes were steady, not catastrophic. Valerie made herself breathe. What happened? She asked, voice too calm for her bones. When we came off bypass, Maya's heart threw an arrhythmia, and we saw a small bleed along the patch line, Dr. Kwan said, plain and merciful. We controlled the bleeding, corrected the rhythm, and returned to bypass briefly to give her heart time to rest. We closed carefully. She's in the PICU. Right now she's stable, sedated, and ventilated, which is what we want. I'm telling you about the complication because I promised I'd use the whole truth. The words landed like stepping stones across black water. Valerie stood on each one. Stable, sedated, ventilated, want, whole truth. Is she okay? She asked, hating the childishness and needing it. She's okay for where we are in the process, Dr. Kwan said. No surprises on imaging after correction. Labs are acceptable. We'll watch for swelling and rhythm overnight. You did everything right, Mom. Valerie's mouth opened and nothing came out. Miles's hand found the center of her back, pressure warm and anchoring. Ms. Ortiz exhaled like a kettle that decided not to boil over. The room returned to its ordinary size. Can we see her? Miles asked. In 10 minutes, Dr. Kwan said. Let the team settle lines. Prepare for wires and tubes. Lots of numbers. None of it is a verdict. It's information. We'll walk you through all of it. When they stepped into the PICU, the world became gentler and more precise. Lights were lower. Voices carried a new grammar, quick and quiet. Machines drew thin green mountains across small screens. Maya lay wrapped in warmed blankets, cheeks pink from anesthesia, a tiny garden of lines and sensors blossoming from her arms. The ventilator breathed at her shoulder, soft and insistent. Someone had propped the stuffed dragon at the foot of the bed like a ridiculous sentry. Valerie's hands hovered, afraid to touch and afraid not to. A nurse in sunflower scrubs smiled under her mask. You can put your hand on her, she said, guiding. Gentle pressure on the head or feet. Kids know who is near. Valerie laid her palm on her daughter's hair. The softness of it wrecked her. She bent, forehead to forehead, and let one tear fall where the nurses could not see. Hi, baby, she whispered. It's Mommy. The dragon found the signs. Miles took the other side of the bed. He didn't try to fix anything. He set the phone on the rolling tray and started the rain track, so quiet the nurses had to tilt their heads to hear it. He placed a finger on the blanket the way you'd calm a skittish bird. Hey, traveller, he whispered. You did the hard part. We're here. An hour later, when the first wave of adrenaline emptied and left her shaking, Valerie let herself sit in the hard chair and finally take a breath that touched bottom. For a minute in that room, she said, not looking away from Maya, I thought I would shatter into exactly the number of pieces as there are wires in this unit. Miles kept his eyes on the little green mountains. You didn't, he said. I didn't, she echoed, then turned to him. But only because there was a wall at my shoulder. She studied his face, the familiar scar by his jaw, the wariness under his eyes that matched hers. When this is over, when we walk out of this building with her, I'm not going to pretend this is a small thing in my life. I stopped pretending at the gate. He let himself smile, the kind that starts in the eyes. I'm not pretending either. They took turns dozing and standing, 2 shifts of the same vigil. At 3 a.m., a resident with careful hands eased a drug lower. At 4, a nurse with patient eyes explained the rhythm strips again. At 5, the ventilator sighed and the doctor nodded. Maybe later today. Valerie slept for 11 minutes in the chair, woke with her neck on fire, and found a folded hoodie under her cheek that hadn't been there before. Miles's, smelling like rain and pencil shavings. By mid-morning, the weaning trial began. By noon, Maya coughed, gagged, cried weakly, and the tube slid free. There is no sound on earth like a child taking her own breath after a machine has done it for her. It is messy and sacred and louder than you thought it would be. Maya's lashes fluttered. She saw them. She reached for both at once with the tiny authority of a queen. "Mommy," she rasped. "Mr. Miles." Her fingers closed on theirs. "Is the dragon home?" "He is," Miles said, voice breaking for the first time. He got a little lost, but he listened when you told him the signs. They cried then, all three, in ugly, grateful ways that made everything better rather than worse. Miss Ortiz cried too, because some rooms ask you to. The next days were small work and large miracles. Breathing without help, sitting up, sipping water, laughing once, startling herself. The rhythm monitor flattened into boredom. Valerie read out loud until her voice wore raw, and Miles took over, making lousy jokes good by saying them softly. Nurses came and went with their uncanny grace. Dr. Kwan made rounds with the exact mixture of pride and caution that builds trust. "We'll watch for fluid," she said. "We'll count steps, but the heart is happy." Outside the hospital, life insisted on existing. The RFP drew 18 submissions in 48 hours. Caldwell called twice. She let it go to voicemail twice. Tia emailed Miles photos of foam models and a subject line that said simply, "Win this honestly or I riot." Ms. Ortiz texted a picture of the bodega wall with a handwritten flyer. "Harbour North Community Review, Saturday 3 p.m. Bring your benches, complaints and your hopes. Rice and beans after." On Friday, a PR flack from a business site requested a comment about the CEO's architect boyfriend and whether the project is a vanity play. Valerie stared at the email and felt the old fury reach for her. Then she wrote a statement and let Miles read it before she sent it. "Harbour North will be built by the firm that wins a transparent process weighted for equity and excellence. I have recused myself. Our mission is not a headline. It's a neighbourhood. Today my daughter takes 3 steps without getting winded. That's the only optics that matter to me this week. Miss." Ortiz underlined a sentence with a row of heart emojis and then added, "Tell them to come sit on the noon bench." The selection panel met in a spare conference room at Quinn Harbour with the blinds open. Procurement, equity, 2 outside architects with matching skepticism, and Miss Ortiz who brought oranges and wore her church jacket like a gavel. Valerie watched from the hallway, not because she doubted them, but because something in her understood. This was the price of being believed. Surrender the part you want to hold. She saw Miles only once that day, across the street as he bought coffees for his interns, head bent to listen to a young designer's idea like he had invented listening. The scores came back 2 days later. She was at Maya's bedside, untangling charger cords, when the equity officer knocked softly. "We have a result." Valerie stepped into the hallway, knees suddenly unreliable. "Tell me." "Washington Carter Studio," the woman said, and grinned with her whole face. "Highest on design, highest on community engagement, second on budget. Your RFP clause about Miss Ortiz's bench at noon wiped 2 firms off the map. They tried to indent the conversation with buzzwords and forgot what time the sun burns." For a second, Valerie forgot how to speak. Then she remembered and said, with exquisite professionalism, "Thank you. Please notify all firms and post the scoring summary this afternoon." She walked back into the room, leaned on the bed rail, and laughed until Maya laughed too. When Miles arrived 20 minutes later with fresh coffee and a sticker book, she didn't bother with speeches. She took his face in her hands and kissed him the way she'd promised herself she would. No boards, no headlines, no careful red dress between them. When she broke away, breathless, she said, "You won in daylight." He rested his forehead against hers. "We did," he said, with a neighbourhood watching. Groundbreaking was 6 weeks later, on a morning with a civil sky. The chain-link fence was gone. In its place stood a temporary gate painted by kids, dragons and buses and arrows pointing everywhere at once. A podium nobody cared about waited in the shade of a crane. Reporters came because reporters come. So did mothers with strollers, men with lunch pails, teens with earbuds, and a woman in a church jacket carrying oranges like sacraments. Valerie wore a simple dress that didn't apologize for her hips and a hard hat that did not diminish her crown. Maya wore a tiny vest and bossed everyone. Miles wore boots and the look of a man who'd learned how joy fits on his shoulders. They did the speeches because cities require ritual. Caldwell shook hands stiffly and said the right things. Miss Ortiz spoke last without notes. "We made them promise the benches won't burn," she said. "They wrote it down where lawyers can see. That's how you love a place." Then the part that mattered. Shovels in dirt. A little girl's hand on a handle alongside her mother's and the architect's. Cheers like weather. Someone started the rain track low under the noise. It sounded like blessing. Afterward, as kids painted a plywood dragon by the future rill, Valerie and Miles walked the chalk lines of the plaza. "Wayfinding green," she said, tasting it again, then looking up at the ordinary miracle of a sky. "We're going to get lost sometimes." "We will," he said. "But look how many signs we've made." Maya barreled into them, wedging herself between their legs with the casual entitlement of the beloved. "Mr. Miles," she declared, "the dragon says thank you." "Tell him to come sit on Miss Ortiz's bench at noon," he said. They stood in the dust and the light of a beginning, 3 people who had been strangers at a gate and were now a family made of a choice, a surgery, and a map. The storm that had cancelled a flight had turned into shade and water and a place to sit. The city breathed around them, patient and loud and full of directions, and for once all the signs agreed.